library, my personal little library. So we meet where, so we say goodbye in the place where we met, where we have met. So, but as I told you earlier, I told you earlier that we'll probably finish off this lecture today, but I'm a little bit afraid that we will not be able to make it. So there is a risk that we'll have to meet again next week. A very high risk of this. I wanted to cut it shorter than I initially expected, but it seems that I wasn't able to do it when I saw the slides. So just I'm waiting for you to say hello so that I know that you are there. And once you are there, we'll start. Carolina, the winner, the winning Carolina. Okay, so hello, Julia, the future winner. So you are on YouTube, right? Oh, you're on Facebook or YouTube? And Martina is here as well. So okay, so we can start. So we have the hardcore crew here, and Anna is also here. So that's great. So without any further introductions this time, let's just cut to the chase. Ha ha ha! When I will get my prize, says Carolina. Does everyone know that Carolina won a silver coin, a beautiful vintage silver coin yesterday in our Minecraft contest? If you didn't see the contest, then you can visit our website and watch it, and watch how Carolina won. In how good fashion she won. And you will also learn what's the name of a bat that lives in our department now. So a lot of things have happened over the last three months. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. In February, if any of you told me that we will record so many materials online, that we'll make Minecraft contests, I would never imagine that it will happen like this. It's just crazy how this COVID turned our world upside down. But in some cases, I think that the change is definitely for much better. So give me just a second so that I can check one more setting here, whether we are streaming. Did you get used to, or have you got used to this lifestyle of having classes online, or is it still bothering you? What's your opinion about this, by the way? Do you got used to it and it feels rather neutral? Human beings are very adaptive, and I wouldn't be surprised if you said, well, it seems normal now. It seemed a little bit different at the beginning. But as far as lectures are concerned, did you get used to it, or you think that you're missing something extremely important, not being able to look at me directly? I don't think you miss a lot. I don't think you miss anything. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. So today we'll talk about processing information. So we covered perception, we covered memory, bits of it, at least bits of it. And today we'll talk a little bit more about how we process social information. So we are about here. As I said earlier, from time to time it's quite difficult to to dissect these processes one from another, because this is a model. This is just a model. It's not how our mind works, because it's not like this, that you have an input and the impulse goes and the input closes, and you have this stage of perception, encoding, storage, retrieval, decisions, and behavior. In most cases, the input is ongoing, and perception is iterative. There's input, you receive some information, then you do something to get better information. It's an ongoing process. Every component of this in this model is working at the same time, right? So, in many cases, what we'll talk about now might be as well analyzed from the perspective of perception or even memory. Julia says, I think I got used to it, but I still want to come back to the uni because I miss people so much. Yeah, exactly. You miss people so much. Okay, I wanted to say something, but okay, I miss people as well. So if we talk about, actually we have talked about this for the last three months, about those two modes of processing information. And by the way, sorry, because Carolina asked when I will get my prize. Soon, okay, soon. Don't call us, we will call you. So if you forget about it, just call us at that moment. So one of the most recurring theme in our lecture is, and in whole psychology, and I think also any kind of science related to information processes like cognitive science, we mentioned this duality in our mind, that we have two modes of processing information. One is automatic, easy, unintentional. It happens whether we want it or not. It's easy, so because it requires very few cognitive resources, it's just easy to do. We have specialized parts of our brain that are specialized in doing this sort of information, sort of operation. So it's just effortless. We do it whether we want it or not, so it's difficult to control, and we don't know how it's going on, why it's going on, how it's going on, where it's going on to, and where it's going from. So it lies outside of our awareness. And then we have this neocortex related capability of processing information in a better way, in an improved way, not necessarily better. Qualitatively better, because if we really devoted a lot of time and energy, and when we process when we process social information intentional, so we really want to know what kind of person this is, then we can arrive at very close to objective, to some extent, close to objective outcomes. And actually, a huge part of psychology is about going beyond automatic processes towards controlled processes. So we use, in psychotherapy, for instance, we use intentional processing of information. So we try to process and we try to understand everything. What your life is, what kind of a person you are, how you influence others, how others influence you. We try to process it in a controlled manner, which is called psychotherapy, right? You might call it this way. It's effortful. It requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money. If we talk about psychotherapy, it's effortful, it's painful, but we can do it. So it is a kind of achievement. Although, as we will talk in the second part of our lecture today, it's also not 100% accurate, and there are some common mistakes that we do when we try to process information in a controlled way. So the automatic processing of information resembles perception. It resembles perception. That's one of the reasons why I gave you some perceptual examples earlier, with this twisting lady on one of her legs, whether she's turning left or right. Because our judgments, our automatic judgments, are very much like this. They resemble perception. So they are quick, and interesting fact about it is that if we have more time, the quality of automatic judgment does not improve. It doesn't improve, right? It does not improve if we try hard. It does not improve if we are trained in any way to do it better. It's just a part of how we are hardwired. So it's like perception, right? You can do some things generally, but basically you cannot stop perceiving something. You cannot stop seeing something. You cannot stop seeing something in a different color than it is. If you think it's black, if you think it's blue, then it will be blue. How much energy and effort you put into trying to see it as red. Except for some optical illusions. But as I've said earlier, optical illusions are not the best source of building theories for the general and overall functioning of people, because optical illusions are based on errors that we do. And atypical stimuli that we usually don't have in our environment. As with the Necker's cube, you saw, right? You saw these wires that seem to be a cube. In normal situations, you might just turn a little bit. If you saw a wire of a cube, and you don't know which part of this cube is closer to you or further to you, you just make a little move, and this is what we do in such situations, a very tiny move, and you see the parallax. So the fact that something that's further moves slower than something that's closer to you, and you immediately see, okay, I know which part is this, which facet of this cube is closer to me, because my perception is active. I'm active perceiver, and optical illusion results only from the fact that for some reason I cannot move my head, and this is not what we have in our everyday life. So the problem of judgments related to awareness, or that are going outside of our awareness, is something that we might start with. So we can be not aware. We can be not aware of our judgments, or why we formulate certain judgments. There's this Iowa gambling task paradigm in which people try to guess a certain strategy to predict future outcomes, and research in which you analyze the brain activity of a person and declarative knowledge. So what people are able to say, why they choose certain strategies to find the correct answer. This research shows that before people are able to say that they know the rule, their brain activity reveals that they already know this rule. So you have this gut feeling, right? Gut, not God, but gut feeling. Although it's not from guts, it's rather from our brain. Although our guts also are are reactive to what's happening in our brain. But you have these gut feelings, you know the answer, and although you cannot say exactly what's the rule, what's the correct answer, you know that you know the correct answer. Why it's correct, so you know that it is a correct answer before you are able to say why this is a correct answer. I don't know whether you have this kind of experience in your life, but I experience this feeling when I'm how do you call it, quantum puzzle in English, when I'm solving puzzles, not necessarily. Also, actually, I think it's all sorts of puzzle, but here I'm mentioning this. Could you Google it for me? What do you call this kind of a puzzle where you have all those tiny elements that you need to fix together to see a picture? So I very often, from time to time, I tend to have to have this bout of addiction, and I solve these puzzles for like 2 or 3 days or a week or something. It's like an alcoholism. Puzzle alcoholism, and I experience this kind of feeling that I see one piece of the puzzle, and I know that I will be able to put it somewhere, exactly in somewhere on this board. Although I really don't know where, but I just have this feeling. So. So this is one of the examples that shows that we are able to know how to act, do a puzzle, put together a puzzle. Okay, dictionary says. Thank you. A puzzle, crossword puzzle. It's like krzyżówka, right? Crossword puzzle. Did I say crossroad? Crossword puzzle. So all sorts of these kind of research shows us that it's like this. The mere exposure effect, we'll talk about this. Subliminal cues that we can be presented with some minimal information. And what we also talked about, that we are very often convinced after something happens that our judgment was based on some deliberative thinking rather than the result of some processes that go outside of our awareness, which is the majority of what's happening in our mind. The mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect might be presented in many cases, in many places during this lecture. One of them is here, right? So, mere exposure effect is related to judgments, right? To judgments, because you say whether you like something or not. So this is a judgment. Whether you like a person, whether you like a certain person or not, whether you like a certain product or not. So the mere exposure effect says, as the name suggests, that for liking, it's enough if you just see something, if you perceive something, even if it is a minimal, even if it's a minimal exposure. It can be longer, but even if it's so brief that you cannot perceive it consciously, it will influence the liking of certain objects, just because you saw it earlier. And yeah, and one of the authors said about the glow of warmth in the presence of something familiar, right? This gut feeling, this kind of the presence, the glow of warmth. So this process, this probably it might be some bodily process that that already tells you that this some part of your brain has some attitude towards this, generated some attitude. Repeated exposure from fear to liking. We might say that it is an adaptive feature, because if you don't know something, you might question yourself. You might ask yourself, if I don't know something, should I approach or should I avoid it? It all depends on the context in which you are living in. Nowadays, I think it's better to approach, not to lose opportunities. But in the past, it might be a risky thing. So you see an animal that you haven't seen before in the woods, for instance. Is it a good idea to go closer or run away, right? So the fact that you see something for the second time, right, suggests that it was a safe encounter for the first time when you saw this. So it might be one good strategy to not to avoid it anymore. So the mere exposure effect is one of the effects that is easy to demonstrate. It's very strong, but it's quite difficult to explain why it's this way. But one of the reasons might be the increased perceptual fluency. We already talked about this when we talked about beautiful faces. And one of the reasons why we might like looking at beautiful faces and beautiful objects in general, like very symmetrical objects, is that they are easy to process. It costs only half the amount of processing capacity, of our processing capacity, processing resources, because you just analyze half of it and then you double this. It's like with computers. If you program something symmetrical, then you just program half of it, and then the other is just the other way around. You just multiply it by 1, for instance. So this might be one of the reasons why we like a little bit more something that we saw, that we've already seen earlier. So it's easier to process. And ease, if something is easy, we like it. So it generates positive affect. And meta-analysis showed that this effect is robust. So it is it's a part of reality. It has been replicated many times. It's the strongest when unfamiliar objects are presented briefly. It peaks at about 10 to 20 presentations. It's the best. You get the most positive response after at least 10 to 20 presentations, and then people can get bored if it's too frequent, which is another interesting fact. That perhaps if we see it too often, then it's not necessary. It's not curious anymore. So it's not the best idea to stick to it. Let's seek something better. So it would show this general fight in our brain between approach and avoidance mechanisms. So we are motivated to avoid harm and risk, but at the same time, we need to take some risk and to seek opportunities. And if you have something that's frequent among you, then you should seek something more, something else. Adaptation, right? He mentions the author mentions here the positive affect. We know that positive affect and happiness in general, having positive emotions related to something, positive emotions very quickly adapt. We very quickly adapt to positive objects because in the long term, in the long run, it's beneficial for us because it motivates us towards seeking seeking more opportunities and to develop, to progress. And this is what we need to do. We cannot hold on to one toy all the time. I'm looking around to find a toy. I cannot find any. Unfortunately, I have only Aristotle's mask here. Remember 2 months ago? Did I show it to you? So I will not put it on my head. So you play with something for a month or two, and that's it. You need to find another toy, which decreases and is a risk for our happiness. But in general, it stimulates our adjustment and our development. So mere exposure effect can be observed in many contexts, and it generally works. And advertising, it can have mixed effect. It can have a mixed effect. So it generally works. So if you present something more often, people start to like it more. But at the same time, and this is what generates the mixed effect here, this strategy of advertising some products, when you see it too often, it generates some second thoughts. So the initial level is positive, but there is an additional effect that works on the second level, that you start to associate products that you see frequently advertised this way with low reputation companies. So you perceive it as a cheap strategy to present all the same product all the time, everywhere. You think, oh, these guys are so desperate, it must be a lousy product. And this is one of the reasons why in most internet advertising, you can click. If you see an advertisement too often, you can click and ask Facebook or YouTube not to show this advertisement to you anymore. This is good from the perspective of you, your perspective, but also from the perspective of the company, because if the exposure is too high, you will start to hate it. So it's a good idea that you interrupt and they stop sending you their advertisements as soon as you start having too much of this. So in this way, the advertisements are working much better. In economy, a couple of examples, like stock traders invest in domestic companies due to familiarity. So if you are a stock trader, you are much more likely to invest in companies from around small scale companies, not international companies, but you are more likely to invest in domestic companies rather to Hungarian domestic companies, although it might be the same, right? Although it might be very much the same in terms of risk. So stock traders are more likely to invest in their domestic companies or to international companies. And this can be partly explained by the fact that they hear about these companies, that they see these companies, they know about these companies more often, and it makes them like them more. Some more examples include perception of journals, voting patterns. There are mixed results for changing intergroup attitudes, which is worth mentioning here. So there are some instances where repeated exposure to a person that you hate will increase your hate rather than generate liking. So it's if the object is neutral and you have repeated exposure, you'll start to like it. But if it's negative and you see it too often, the effect can be detrimental to your attitude. You can start hating it or disliking this person or this object even more. It's worth mentioning. So because in most cases we say, okay, so mere exposure effect is about liking, but it can be if it's an object that you don't like, then you can radicalize your views. When we are confronted with some information, we have two general processes that can occur. These are general processes that our mind is capable of doing. One called is assimilation, and the other is called, do you know what's the other called? Is it somewhere here? So one process is assimilation, and the other process, can you guess what will be the other process? So we can assimilate, or we can just try to guess. So I will talk about this later. So assimilation is a situation in which we take information, but this information is changed. Is changed to fit our previous knowledge. To fit our previous knowledge. It's like a little bit like this. If you are using this kind of a toy, and this toy is, and imagine that this object is not made of wood, but it's made of something that's what's the word again? I think I have it somewhere. Like chastolina. What's the English for chastolina? Today we'll have a lot of words to learn. I have it somewhere in my brain because oh my God, I bought so much chastolina for my son. In the dog. How do you pronounce it? Dog, or something like this. So you can, if you have an object that's made of chastolina, you can find the right spot and put it inside. If it's a cylinder, for instance. But if it's not cylinder, if it's a cube, you can also put it, and it will fit, because the shape will change. The shape of the object will change, and it will adapt. The object will adapt to your mental representations. So we call it assimilation. So I assimilated something. So the object has changed a little bit. And the other process that you didn't write me here is accommodation. So you change under the influence of information. So in the information that's activated in us, influences the incoming information as more similar. This is why we call it assimilation. It's more similar to, so if you have, for instance, positive object or a negative object of a group, it should increase positive or negative group judgments. And it can be used for stereotypes change, influencing the perception of politicians, prosociality, and things like this. It also contributes to some errors. Let's skip it. If we talk about assimilation information, one interesting phenomenon is related to subtyping deviance. Stereotype deviance. So we don't want, because in general we don't want to change our views. Our mind is rather conservative. It used a lot of energy to build our current views, our current perception of the world, of ourselves, of other people, and we are really hesitant to change it because once we start to manipulating with this, it can collapse, and we need security in our life. So we need our worldview and self-view to behave in a predictable way, to know what to do in our life. So we are very much protective about our views. And this is one of the reasons why stereotypes are formed and so robust, so difficult to change. And one interesting phenomenon is that if you receive an information that contradicts your stereotypes, and you should accommodate in this situation, you should change your view of a certain group, for instance. Like in this research, they did the research on gay promiscuity, so having a lot of partners. So if people have this negative stereotype of gay men having a lot of partners, not paying attention to their partners, just being motivated to change their partners all the time. If you confront a person who has such a stereotypical perception, confront with an information of a guy gay, who is gay and has only one partner, for instance, then people with strong stereotypes tend to protect their schemes, their cognitive schemes. They don't want to change it, and they will use any other information regarding this person to subtype this person. What does that mean, subtype? To tell that it's not a typical gay, for instance, right? And even if you provide absolutely crazy information, I mean irrelevant information, and say this is a gay, he has only one partner, and he has only one partner for his whole life, right? And he's an accountant, and then people tend to think, oh, so gay accountants are different. So gay accountants are different. He's not a typical gay. He's a gay accountant, and this group of gay men seems different and does not tell us anything about the whole category. We just subtype this. It's a unique situation. It's a subgroup that works a little bit different. So I learned something new. You say, I learned not that gay men are not promiscuitous. What a strange word, difficult to pronounce. Even in Polish, promiskuitywny, we might say. So it's not like that you change and say, okay, so gay men don't have, insane number of partners. You say, oh, I learned something new. That gay accountant, that there are some gays who don't have a lot of partners, and for instance, if they are I don't know, accountants, not show business or something like this, anything. Oh my God, is it raining at your place? Because I can hear a horrible rain coming. It's raining. You can probably hear it. So subtiming is interesting, and you have also contrast effects in judgments. Contrast effects. So it means that there are also some situations, because as I said earlier, if you have one new information about a certain group, you tend to think this group is better, right? So if I hear that Karolina won the contest yesterday, and that she also won this hackathon, right? Was it you? Then I tend to think, oh my God, these guys from cognitive science are incredibly smart. And I think about Julia, Martyna, Anna, and Kalina as brighter. So I generalize this notion to other exemplars. So I'm sorry for calling you like this. So I'm generalizing my attitude towards other exemplars in this category. But there can also be contrast effects in judgments. So contrast will be a situation. Thank you, Caroline. So there also can be situations in which you receive positive information, but it makes you perceive the other instances of this group as more negative. So I can perceive a person as a more negative after I receive some information, some positive information about other person from this group. And why? Because it influences standards. So if I see that a certain person is particularly smart, then I can judge another person as less smart in a harsher way, in a more negative way, because she does not meet the standard anymore. Hello, Daria. You wrote this, and suddenly I heard a thunderstorm. So nice to see you. Have a good sessions with your patients. And to tell you that my fiancé said yesterday that he is tired of you because in our house you are talking more than he is, because I am listening to the lectures in my free time. Have good lecture. Thank you. That's interesting. I heard that some people are afraid that when they open their refrigerator, then they will see me there. So I'm sorry. You must buy yourself some earplugs. Perhaps this will minimize your conflict with your fiancé. So there also can be construct effects, and as you can see, this is one of the situations that we already had, like at least 2 times during this lecture, when we say that something can that something can result in a positive or in a negative effect. So like being manly for a man, being extremely manly. So having very distinctive ornaments, secondary sexual ornaments, like big jaw, strong musculature, and things like this. It makes the man being perceived as less attractive and more attractive at the same time, but for different reasons. So in this case, we also have situations. I think he likes it too, but just doesn't want to admit it. Okay, say hello to him. So I will say hello. What's his name? What's his first name? So I will just make hello to him, and you can show it to him. Perhaps he will start to like me even more. So it suggests that, because we talked about the mere exposure effect, so it suggests that he might have seen me more than 20 times, because after 20 exposures, it becomes annoying when you see something more and more often. So Piotr, just hello, it's nice to see you. I hope you also appreciate at least some of these lectures. So congratulations on your fiancé, and all the best in your future life. I hope you will take some advantage of these lectures. So nice to see you. By the way, nice to meet you, by the way. So we have, in this case, we also have the situation in which we have contrast effects. So positive information can influence our perception of other instances as more negative, right? But for a different using a different mechanism. And this is quite common in what we were talking here about. The mechanisms are different, but so there are 2 outcomes, right? I mean, the same process can, or the same stimulus can influence us in opposite sides. So she's watching it now. So thank you, Piotr. Actually, this is one of the. I talked with my wife today. She told me that this is one of the effects that we have never had before. That when teaching became virtual, whole families are watching lectures. This is wonderful. And even during these lectures, I also had a couple of times, not this particular lecture, even I think if it was even during this lecture, one of you was watching the lecture with your grandmother. I remember that it was in English because I said coronavirus. It was about priming, and I said, and one of you said that your grandmother immediately realized that we are talking about coronavirus. So coronavirus. So the whole families are watching lectures. That's great. We'll have so educated society after this COVID-19. So if you, I will show you one graph that summarizes what we already said a moment. Okay, it was you, Martina. Your lovely grandma. She's not with us right now, right? She's. I mean, at this moment, right? So this model describes what we said here. So feature-based evaluative judgments require mental representation of the object and the standard. So if we evaluate something, if we want to judge something, we need to know something about the object, and we need to know something about, and we need to have the standard activated, the standard for comparison. We are comparing all the time, comparers. People are comparers. We compare all the time. Comparing is what we do all the time. In our social life, it's comparing all the time. But here we are comparing with something that we have in our mind. No, in general, processing information, any sort of information, is comparing. So it's taking information and comparing to see what it is, and comparing to see whether I should like it or not, whether I should run away or whether I should get closer, and things like this. And both components are context sensitive and based on information that's accessible at the current moment, right? This is what we also mentioned many times earlier. We are not able to activate everything that's stored in our brain each time we need to compare something against something else. It would be crazy. So if new information, for instance, you hear that the politician had a sexual scandal, for instance, or not necessarily sexual, it might be some financial scandal. We have some financial scandals going on currently. So let's say it was a financial scandal. So whether it will result in, how it will influence our perception of this person and other politicians in general, it all depends. Whether we will use this information to influence our representation of this person, or whether we will use this information to influence, to change our standard, right? So let's imagine that you have some scandal written by politician Miller. We don't have, perhaps we have, because it's a very common, it's strange, but it is a common surname in Poland. We had one famous politician called Miller, I think, Leszek Miller. Are there any other Millers right now? There are definitely no politicians called Smith in Poland. But there was one Kowal. Is he still in politics? I'm not sure of this. So if you have a scandal, it's not necessarily easy to predict how it will influence your perception of politicians. And this particular politician. So you have a scandal written politician Miller, but can politician Miller be used for constructing the judgmental target? So if the judgmental target is specific, such as politician Smith, for instance, it influences the comparison standard. So we have politician Miller that we attach to this comparison standard. So we say politicians are garbage. I wouldn't term it that strongly, but I generally have very low opinion about politicians in general. Not because they are bad people, but that's because politics are an arena of some really evil actions, and you cannot do it another way because you will be immediately wiped out of the political scene. So there is a scandal, and I tend to judge another politician, Smith, more favorably. So we have a contrast effect. That's because I put this bad person into the comparison standard, and immediately they generate more favorable attitude towards politician Smith. And if the judgment target is politicians in general, then I include this information about Miller into this judgmental target, and it results in the assimilation effect. So I hate those that I hated even more, because it does not influence the comparison standard in this case, but the judgmental target. So we have the assimilation effect. So one event can generate two processes. So another model will start. We'll talk about reflective and reactive, impulsive responses in the second part of this lecture. So let's make a short break. Okay, so let's make like 10 minutes break. Okay, let's take a 10 minutes break, and let's meet again. So you have the link. I sent you links, so you can enter the second link, and we will start the second lecture in 10 minutes. Thank you. See you soon.